This is Ukraine 101, a podcast in which two Ukrainians have a frank conversation. In this episode, we'll talk about the post-truth and propaganda, global perception of Ukraine, destruction of the Kakhovka Dam, and global reaction. Of course, we'll share our feelings as well. My name is Dana. My co-host is Karina. We invite you to walk in our shoes for the next hour.
You're listening to Co-Station.
Who are you?
I ask myself the same question every time I wake up.
Right.
You get out of the bed and you look in the mirror and you think, the fuck is going on? Yeah, but the context is important. So I'm Ukrainian. Name is Dana. I go by with pronouns they or he if you must. I am doing a PhD at Delft at the moment. Let's see how it goes whenever this goes out. Yeah, I've been living here for close to 4 years at this point. I think it's three and a half, something like this.
Awesome. What's your favorite color?
Well, today I'm in red light and with pink shirt, so let's go with pink.
Awesome. Yeah, I was gonna compliment your shirt, but I already did before we started,
That's
so
right.
I'm not gonna do it another time.
Who are you?
I am Ukrainian, first and foremost. I say this very often that before I am going to identify as anyone else out there in life, probably by the just due to the circumstances we are living through right now. I'm Ukrainian. My name is Karina, and I've been living in the Netherlands for almost 6 years now. I happened to apply for my Dutch nationality thingy like last week, and it was not fun. I don't have to renounce my Ukrainian nationality because I'm kind of like one of those exceptions. But yeah, okay, that's a long story. But yeah, if you want to know anything about my identity, it is like it's that complex. But I've been living here for 6 years. Before that, I lived all over the place. I am I do talking for a living, aka I'm in sales in IT. Well,
So cool.
yeah, well, and yeah. So today I'm here to hopefully bring some context on what is going on in our minds. You know, for 2.5 years straight, we've been living and surviving probably the most um, online broadcasted war that is directly impacting ourselves. So we're on the receiving end of, well, what I will dare to say a genocide. And yeah, how that feels. I'm definitely here to talk about how I feel, hopefully, also convey some thoughts that are occurring in the heads of other Ukrainians on a daily basis, and hopefully share a few opinions on that.
Right, yeah. So maybe let's do also some signposting, right? That we'll do that in the context of like a world where you live through a lot of propaganda, right? And then there's like the notion of truth is not as fixed. And how do you cope with that?
I think it's a good opening for
Right.
today, right? So I think uh, we're not going to do like a book review right today because
No.
it's also going to be cheating from my end because
Mhm.
I haven't actually read the book or any of those books, but we can refer to a few things also for some expectation settings. Um, yeah, Peter Pomerantsev talks about concepts like post-truth and different versions of truth.
Mhm.
And of course, it is worth mentioning that the reason why Ukraine and Ukrainians are going through a lot of misery today is the fact that Russia decided to attack us first in a kind of hybrid and covered way in 2014, and then it kind of went ahead and attacked us again in 2022 in a lot more brutal and, well, in this case,
Just
open
wider
way.
scale, yeah.
Yeah, what we refer to as a full scale invasion. And to a certain extent, this wouldn't have been possible either in the context of Russia going in just full scale war or the rest of the world just kind of like sitting and watching and really wondering like what is actually going on
Mhm.
without that flood of propaganda.
Yeah, and then I guess from my end, there was another book. It's not directly related, but I've been interested in Holocaust denialism for a while now, right? And um, I don't want to compare the sort of the actual crimes or the genocides, right, that are committed, But I find that the people who deny Holocaust, right, they use certain tactics that, like, at least in my view, they rhyme with how people deny war in Ukraine, right? How people deny, I would say, victimhood.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess these two are main inspirations, and there will be more as we go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
What made you interested in Holocaust denialism?
I guess my feeling is that we are sort of the last generation, right, which can witness the actual survivors of the Second World War. Like, I have two siblings, right, both of them younger, and seeing how they view the world through a slightly different prism, right? So their notion of what is true, right, is much more fluid. Um, so yeah, like, there also been like a raise of skepticism towards Holocaust, right? Also a raise of anti-Semitism, and I've been curious since forever. But now that we decided to actually, record a conversation, I thought it's a good time to pick it up. Actually, I think this book I saw in Tallinn in the Museum of Banned Books. Yeah.
By the Soviet Union, I bet.
No, well,
Or
so some of them are right, but they also try to collect the books that are banned in different countries, right? Like including the US and yada yada. I don't think this one is banned in particular, but it has like this backstory, right, of being sued, right, and then winning the lawsuit. Like, you wanted to begin talking about the prism, like, of Russian lens, right? What's the thing that bothered you the most, right? In the modern worldview, that like, when you see that people are influenced by Russian state propaganda, right, and the Easterners don't really realize it. So,
yeah.
what is your biggest nitpick?
Yeah, well, everything, but um I think in this case, um the way in which we suddenly appeared on the world map in 2022 in probably the most, like, in the worst possible way.
Mm-hmm.
There couldn't have been a more tragic way to appear on the world map. And by appearing, I mean, of course, Ukraine has been there the
Mm-hmm.
entire time, or had been there before 2022. But we suddenly then became an actual place that
Mm-hmm.
exists, which hadn't been the case before. We were just somewhere near Russia, and where exactly that puzzle piece falls, nobody really cared about that. Even though we appeared in 2022 in the present day context, so many people still prefer to relate to Russia first before
Mm-hmm.
relating to Ukraine. And a good example of that is just like, well, people in Ukraine do X. And I'm like, but why do you think people in Ukraine do X? And they say, well, because I have a Russian friend or colleague, and they
Mm-hmm.
told me that people in Russia do X. And I'm like, well, to a certain extent, of course, we had to share, a certain amount
Mm-hmm.
of history due to being occupied by the Soviet Union for 70 years straight, and then before that still being occupied by the Russian
Russian Empire.
Empire, right? So then, like, we're sharing probably a certain amount of common features, customs, I don't know.
No, there's definitely like shared
Yeah,
context.
right, like shared context. But please do not assume that,
Mm-hmm.
like, you have way better ways of, like, being sensitive about this and asking, do people in Ukraine do X, or like, what do people in Ukraine do when it comes to XYZ, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
that would have been such a and this is just an example, right? I'm obviously not going to be offended at everything people are asking me, because or stating towards me.
Pow, pow, pow.
Yeah, well, and I'm actually kind of like, on days when I have energy, I'm really like, oh, this is a great chance to, like,
Mm-hmm.
go on and explain. The problem is most days I don't have energy, and then I'm like, oh God, okay, again,
Mm-hmm.
and then I just have to kind of go ahead and start, like, obviously, if I start being very emotional about these things, like, oh, well, this is really wrong. I don't have those credits, which is probably like second, like, is part and parcel of these misconceptions that are being fed by the Russian propaganda, just Russian influence in the world, is that um, we don't get to be emotional. We don't get to be maybe outraged, maybe like really on the brink of having a mental breakdown about everything that's going on, because we are Ukrainians and we are still, as I said, like, relative to Russia, we are out there somewhere. Like, and because we are kind of are still unfortunately perceived as second class citizen out there, intentionally or not. I'm afraid we don't really get the credits for what we are actually doing for the world, such as collective security. And unfortunately, we are not allowed to have strong words, strong emotions, reactions.
Mhm.
And I'm just wondering, like, how are you feeling about that?
Yeah, like this definitely rings true, right? Every time you're being asked any question whatsoever, right? I don't know, like this is a statistic pulled out of my ass, but 8 of 10 times it feels like an uphill battle, right? People ask you a question, already have like an assumption in mind, and then you have to actively challenge, like you have to first guess what exactly they have in mind, right? And then you have to like actually go against it, right? And fight through like objections that arise immediately. There is this certain sort of subjectivity missing, right? And we've witnessed this historically, right? Like, and I'm talking about fresh history. What's a good example? Yeah, I think even after 2014, there was at least one gathering. I think it was U.S., Germany, and Russia, right? When they were talking about Ukraine, and I think that kind of like literally that puts you outside of the room, right? Like you're then not a decision maker. You are just this appendix that happens to exist somewhere there, right? And apparently Russia is interested, and why everyone else should bother? Yeah, and then when you're doing this kind of argumentative discussion, right? And you're like, no, no, I really think that the example we were talking about just a moment ago, right, was Kahovka Dam. I still remember this. Russians blew it up, right? And then there was just so much skepticism just flooding, like even my circles, right? Like people who are relatively high educated. Like I'm doing a PhD, so uh,
You'd like to believe that they are highly educated.
they better be. Um,
Could you give us some context about what Kahovka Dam is? Because I'm
uh,
sure not everyone even knows about this,
yeah.
which is tragic.
Um, Ukraine has a main river, the name being Dnipro. And there are certain dams on it, right? And then they form water reservoirs, right? And I think Kafka Dam was guarding one of the bigger ones, or perhaps the biggest that we had. And I think it was near the time when Russians were receding from Kherson. Yeah, and then sort of you wake up one day, right, and it's collapsed. And I mean, I remember my immediate reaction, right? I was like, fuck this, not again. And then I reached out to a couple of friends who are from Kherson, and sort of they had some fundraisings like they had friends who were then local, right? And they had some fundraisers going on, and I tried to share them. Uh, but you then also face like, oh no, I don't know about that, right? Maybe it was the Ukrainians trying to stage something, right? Like it benefits them, and you ask how, and they're like, oh, I don't know. No, it's war, it's complex, and you're like,
Yeah.
and right, and then it's sort of like you have this time period where Russians commit a crime, right, and then they flood the internet, right? The public opinion swings kind of in that direction. Only later, when like enough evidence has appeared to say with certainty that it's Russians who blew up the Hofka Dam, right, or who committed the crime, only then you can start having this argumentative things, right? And by default, you're kind of not an authoritative source of information, like regardless of sort of how much, and then I mean you as generally Ukrainian or Ukraine, right? You have to wait for someone to verify, right? And then you run into the issues when people put a lot of trust in this international organizations like Red Cross or OSCE, right, or whoever, and they prove to be dysfunctional again and again and again, and then you're left with sort of the state where you are obviously very emotional because something big just happened, right? And then there are proofs, but somehow they're not enough. And then people are kind of like, I'm not talking everybody, right? But like a lot of folks are by default skeptical towards anything you say. And that puts you in a position where you have to prove things, right? And prove on a very rational level, which does sort of force you to become emotionless to an extent. Because
It also puts all the burden on you
kind of, yeah.
when you're already strained to the stretched to the limit and trying to kind of just
Keep
get
it
through the
together.
day. Yeah, I think this is an interesting example of just how propaganda works. And we are not talking right now about propaganda posters appearing,
Mm-hmm.
everywhere in the world with like a big
Like
red,
a guy pointing at you
yeah,
and asking how you
saying,
signed up.
like, do you know who blew up the dam? I think it's more about, what Pomerantsev indeed talks about in his books, his podcasts in this case. I should admit,
Mm-hmm.
I haven't read the books yet, but he talks about these concepts of, we have the internet, in certain countries like China, where it is censored, um, top down,
Mm-hmm.
right? So like then you cannot really post anything unless it passes the full check.
Censorship, yeah.
Yeah, censorship check. But then you also have the internet of, modern day Russia, which also has been spilling over to a high extent abroad, where people haven't been really aware of just how much influence Russian disinformation campaigns have. And it sounds all like, oh, well, conspiracy theory and tinfoil hat, right? But these same tactics as we saw in Russia, circa 2010, when democracy, as it existed in Russia. I'm not sure if that ever had been the case, but
Excellent.
it's just kind of started retreating, thanks to just thousands of opinions of anonymous accounts being voiced, like, oh, we don't really know the entire truth.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I've heard it's different than that. And you just go into the comment section of any post out there on Russian social networks, or well, in the Russian speaking space, and you just see all these opinions that are just they sound wild, but
Mm-hmm.
they also sound like they're coming from real people. And this is where,
I mean, they're made to appear like they're coming from real people, so they,
yeah, yeah, but
hopefully someone's getting their money worth.
well, that's a whole different like side of the story, right? How this is probably managed from somewhere in their bot farms and whatnot. But this is really scary in a way that, when you are going to say, well, this is wrong, like this should not be the case, that there are just thousands of these posts, with nearly identical contents being just like regurgitated on the internet on questions like, who blew up the Kahovka Dam, or has the Holocaust ever happened? Of course it has. Well, but like on these things, there are these thousands of accounts that are expressing really controversial opinions. And folks that are good at the internet hygiene, they might just kind of like, you know dismiss that.
Mm-hmm.
But 99% of people out there might start wondering, like, even if it just plants a seed of a doubt in
I mean,
your
that's
in your mind,
exactly what
that's
it
enough.
tries to do, right?
Yeah.
Like it's old as a world tactic, right? Where you don't necessarily have to disprove the claim of the other side, right? But if you're just trying to undermine their authority, right, it's enough to start just saying, "Oh no, but I don't know if we can trust you, right? I don't know if there is like if we'll know the truth at all, right?"
And it's far more destructive, right,
Mm-hmm.
than just also really coming up there with like some kind of hardliner argument of like, oh, this has never happened, like, okay, the Kahovka Dam
Mm-hmm.
has never been blown up, it's actually still there, like, but like when someone just goes out there and just says, well, we don't really know who's done it,
Mm-hmm.
right, like, and the damage is done, like, so as you said, even if the investigation disproves, like, these completely like insane theories, even if that is done, like, years later, which we know the international um international law is usually slow
Mm-hmm.
to move. They need to gather all the evidence, which is understandable, but the absence of real firm statements in the first couple of days, hours,
Mm-hmm.
after something as horrendous as this happens, that really also
I mean,
adds to the
and
damage.
like it bears the fruits later, right? Because with like Hofkadam, um, the backlash kind of never happened, right? And that's the thing that baffles me the most, is that something this big happens, right? You have like cities flooding, right? You have I don't know, ecosystems ruined, and then there is no real backlash, right? Regardless of how much time has passed,
Yeah.
um, the fact that the world didn't react in the moment, right? means that and a month later just forgot. Like
Yeah.
it never happened.
And I think this is really dangerous. This is going to be impacting our democracies across the world because this clearly works, right?
Mhm.
And having a bot farm is probably not that expensive. Like
Yeah.
we could just try to set one up for fun, and just see like if that works. Obviously, I wouldn't want to do that, but if it's if it clearly is this easy in the era of easy access to the internet and
Large language, blah, blah, blah.
large language models,
Yeah, thank you very much.
yeah, that is something that upsets me a lot, because I do see I'm one of those persons that like I get sucked into the internet, and then I
Hmm.
always go into the comments section on like a lot of
Hmm.
Ukraine related things, and then I'm just like, why have I done this?
I'll
You
mess
know?
you all up.
No, I'm more like I've lost faith in humanity. Like
Hmm.
I've read these comments, and now I know these are not real people, or a certain percentage of them aren't, but a certain percentage of them are real people that have been influenced by these BS trolls that I
Hmm.
like. Yeah, and I think this is very sad, and I think this is also there are situations which is probably important to also highlight in here is that probably the Kahovka Dam was logistically from the point of view of performing an investigation that must have been probably also really difficult because it's under the Russian occupation. And
Hmm.
on the other hand, again, coming back to the maybe just to connect this a little bit to the topic we were talking about, Holocaust denialism. So I listened to this podcast about Holocaust denialism, and apparently during the World War II, while Germans were just kind of you know uh, rolling out this industrial killing machine, they also were welcoming the International Red Cross on a regular basis
Hmm.
in their concentration camps and in ghettos. And they were just like, well, nothing is going on here.
Hmm.
You're cordially invited on this specific date at this specific time to check out, all the inhabitants of a specific camp or, a ghetto.
Hmm.
And this was also part of their propaganda, right? Like the fact that they were clever enough to just allow checks. One of the examples was the International Red Cross from Denmark.
Hmm.
They just kind of passed by one of the ghettos in one of the German cities, and everything looked tip top. Flowers, and whatever, and smiling people that were basically threatened with death unless they will start smiling in front of the
Hmm.
cameras of the International Red Cross. And these type of things are also, they're deeply upsetting because these institutions. So my understanding was always like these institutions were set up after the Second World War, which okay, the Red Cross
Hmm.
came about earlier. I think it was after the First World War, if
Hmm.
I'm not mistaken. But they were established so that these type of atrocities wouldn't be possible in the first place,
Hmm.
right? Like the United Nations. And then suddenly they are proving completely useless because like how do you go and assess the situation on the ground in the occupied territory, right? And apparently it's not impossible because the UN representatives do manage to get out there somewhere from
Hmm.
time to time. Same goes for the international, I think, nuclear authority, whatever it's called, and
Hmm.
they're checking the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant from time to time. But then you're just also thinking how how lame is that you can only get there like weeks after,
Hmm.
like, and how lame is that Russia is not playing by the rules and they're not allowing you to go out there and check out these things, and they
Yeah.
still have a seat in the Security Council
Yeah. Yeah.
of the UN. By the
Yeah. I
way,
mean, security.
trigger topic for on a daily basis. Like I wake up with that thought and I'm like, how?
um, yeah. So there was also a relatively recent news piece about what you call it, or the peace agreement that Russia suggested in 2022, right? And how that included a clause of, I guess, sort of morally something similar to a Budapest memorandum, right? Where it would say, yeah, so there's a certain list of countries, right? And then it was a bit stronger worded, right? So then they would get involved if Ukraine gets invaded. But the catch is that Russia also wanted to be on the list, and they wanted, of course, a block in power, right? Meaning that if someone invades Ukraine, uh, and then
Who
Russia
would that
says,
be?
no, no, it's
Lithuanians.
all good. We're not getting no correction to Lithuanians. Yeah, and then sort of, and the Russians will be able to say, yeah, you know what? Actually, it's all good, right? Like nothing to worry about. We are not like nobody is getting involved,
Yeah.
and that is still this frame of reference that persists from the UN, right? That sort of views this world in like, okay, Russia is a pole, right, and you got to respect it, and of course, sort of to form the ground truth, you have to kind of combine sort of all these points of view, right? Only then you arrive somewhere. That is also sort of like similarly to the doubt that you seed for the general public, right? That is also a way to shift the view away from the facts, right? And towards whatever interpretation is in favor of Russia.
I mean, the way I think the way the Security Council of the UN was formed
Hmm.
is bizarrely peculiar, right? If we think about the initial states and parties that joined it,
Hmm.
in the aftermath of the World War II, we have to think of the non-communist China, we have to think of the Soviet Union, we have to think of the US, the UK probably still kept their status quo to a certain
Hmm.
extent. Like, the fact that Germany is not on there, it's like, oh,
Hmm.
why? I wonder why. But if we think about all these things, these institutions are already irrelevant for that exact reason, right? Because the founding members are not what they used to be. They don't stand for the same things. I mean,
Yeah.
Russia certainly stands for a lot of things that Union used to stand for.
Yeah, I mean, so I
You know,
wouldn't even say that the positions changed all that much, right? Because if you look at the Soviet Union at that time, right, I don't think, like, if you compare Russia now to Soviet Union back then, right, with regard to their view on Ukraine, I don't think it would be that different.
no.
I suppose, sort of in the 50s, you think, oh, no, I mean, it's all fine, right? This is never going to happen again. And it comes to a point, right, where never again stops being kind of a promise, right? Like, sort of that will prevent it from happening, that we will not allow this to happen, right? It becomes more like, fingers crossed.
Well, let's hope. Yeah, I'll refer to one more book
Mhm.
because I think also for anyone interested in understanding Ukraine a little bit better,
Mhm.
who is not Ukrainian. One of the most famous writers from Ukraine. Actually, a fun fact: uh, Donna and I know each other thanks to that writer indirectly. That's Andrei Kurkov. You can
Oh, yeah.
look him up. So it is Kurkov. He's a really cool guy. We got to meet each other because and this is going to be actually like a school book example, right, of like how Ukraine gets viewed from the prism of Russia. Like if you wanted a juicy example, here it comes. So on one beautiful September morning, I open my eyes and I just go about my day, and then I find out that the Leiden University, which is one of the more respected universities here in the Netherlands, one of the faculties is organizing a day of the Ukrainian and the Russian language in the same
Hmm.
sentence. And they're going to be translating works of Mr. Andrei Kurkov into both Ukrainian and Russian, which
Was it even Ukrainian? I thought it was.
Ukrainian was in there. So that
Okay.
was exactly the problem, right? Because it's
Hmm.
like, you guys can, like, 300 people of your own were
Hmm.
already murdered in this war
Hmm.
through the shooting down of the MH17. And I will
Hmm.
never stop talking about MH17 because it's just such a blatant, also,
Hmm.
example of this delayed justice and just like
Yeah, it just
propaganda.
fizzles out.
Yeah, yeah, just propaganda distorting the hell out of the story. But okay, to just go back to the how we actually know each other,
Mhm.
is the fact that the intention was to translate the book into sorry, it's to translate some parts and paragraphs of the book from Russian. I think that was into Dutch, and from Dutch into Russian, Ukrainian, something like that. So it was just basically for the linguists
Mhm.
of the Leiden University. And because it was called a day of the Russian and Ukrainian language, in the same sentence, I said, I just kind of suggested to them,
Mhm.
like, how about you also organize an event where, victims of rape meet their rapists and shake
Mhm.
hands, and, they're all fun.
They
And
all
to a
speak
lot
the
of
same
people, this is
language.
like, this is exactly what I'm talking about, right? Like it came off as such a like repulsive example that they were like,
Mhm.
"Oh, how dare you?" But this is exactly what it feels like to us. Like we do not want to be sitting in the same room with representatives of Russia. We don't want to be pulled into a dialogue with the representatives of Russia. I mean, like think
It's just also not a conversation you can have
no,
fundamentally, right?
no, it's not going to like there's no mending of any kind of relationship before there's justice, before there are reparations, before there's some kind of outcome of this war, which is going to be obviously decisive victory of Ukraine. But and that really threw me off so bad. And we were trying to reason with the faculty, and there are people that you're talking to, and you can tell that these are intelligent people, and otherwise I would have definitely had conversations with them. But in this specific topic, they just cannot comprehend why it is wrong to be
Mhm.
equating Russian and Ukrainian in the same sentence in the context of culture. And why is that? Well, because Russia weaponizes its culture,
Mhm.
right? Like the moment Russians occupy our cities, the first thing they do is they change the boards that basically like announce that, okay, you are
Nameplate, yeah,
entering,
yeah.
yeah, you're entering, whatever now, you're
Mhm.
entering Avdiivka now. So, and this is just so painful to us. But I have this feeling that this is just for the people like the Dutch, that
Mhm.
I do believe that they want us all the best, and they do want to promote the Ukrainian language. And they came to us with this argument that there simply aren't enough people with the knowledge of the Ukrainian language to perform this translation
Mhm.
exercise. To which I asked, but why do you think there aren't enough people with this
Mhm.
knowledge? Because we don't have a huge lobby of the Ukrainian language in Ukraine,
Mhm.
because we're a much smaller
Do
state
you do
and we are not.
Ukrainian studies in Leyden?
I mean, it's your loss if your business model has been, receiving grants from the Russian government, which they're happy to hand out, and they
Mhm.
they have been handing it out. So that's how I met Dana. Um, Sorry, the story got a little bit out of hand, but I basically made this call to the Ukrainian community, like, can you imagine what they just done, these MFs? And Dana was right there for me. And on a early Saturday morning, we went to just kind of like demonstrate like a little rally, telling them like what's
It's good
exactly
fun, yeah.
wrong with this. Like, like you like Russian culture, like yeah, I bet you like Putin, right? Because he's also the product of the great Russian culture, which you know
Yeah, I mean, also a big supporter, right? And one of the faces, like in the current situation, right, where the culture is connected to the country, to the government, right? That's how it moves.
yeah. And I mean, what is actually so great about the Russian culture? Sorry, I really like asking this question.
Mhm.
Killing a grandma with an axe, so cool. Oh my
Mhm.
god. And then being afraid of being prosecuted for it. I mean, like it's
Yeah.
all about like there's so much cult of death. Like it's ah goodness. We did like I'm totally throwing a curveball right now.
No,
We did not agree that I
no,
was
it's right.
gonna.
No, sort of. I guess I'm also like you started with Kurkov, right? And like we're talking about the context that Russian culture exists in, right? And then you get Ukrainian culture, which this is then the context you're viewed in, right? That there isn't much to you except that you were invaded. And it's also tiring, right? In the same way that you're denied subjectivity in a conversation, right? This also strips you of like actually taking Ukrainian culture for what it is, and then even now, right? You are still viewed through this prism, even if you accept, right? Like people accept that okay, Ukraine is an independent state, right, and it has like a lot of things going on its own. Still, the only interest that we can show in it, right, is with regard to Russia, right? Is with regard to the current war, right? Ukraine doesn't exist outside of this war, which is tiring.
I know. I really sometimes I get honestly very happy when people upon finding out where I'm from.
Hmm.
Uh, I first of all I always get happy at words of compassion,
Hmm.
so I will never get tired of that. I'll never feel awkward about that. I
Yeah,
know
if you
that.
offer me a hug, like I'm down.
Oh yeah, 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 please. I'm not gonna let you go for like 50 minutes. It's gonna be a long hug. But I appreciate it when people are offering words of compassion. I also understand when they don't, because it's
Hmm.
just such a debilitating thought. Like, you
Hmm.
see images on TV and then you meet someone who's from there and you're like, oh,
Yeah,
Like
this is actually real.
yeah, and it's scary, right? So I understand both. I think it's also really I get genuinely happy when someone tells me, "Oh, I've actually been to Ukraine,"
Hmm.
and a surprising number of people have been to Ukraine, and I'm like, "Who are you people?" Because
Yeah.
I studied in Kiev, which is probably the most visited
Hmm.
city in Ukraine to like maybe to this day, maybe still
Yeah, like
getting
I
a little
think if
beef.
you take seminars, like I imagine there are quite a few Polish folks, right, who go to Lviv, right? But if you kind of normalize, right, across all countries,
Yeah,
then I think
yeah.
you'd be
Like
right.
internationally, visited by most people from most countries.
Hmm.
Like Kiev was like that, and I wouldn't say that in the times that I was studying in there, which is
Hmm.
actually quite briefly to 2012 to 2016,
Hmm.
that there were tons of international tourists. Again, taking into consideration that we were on the brink of likely also a full scale invasion, which
Yeah,
just
yeah.
hadn't happened in 2014. Even like that year, notwithstanding there weren't awfully many foreigners, and I mean, I know
Hmm.
because like I'd be just kind of out and about in the streets, and occasionally there would be like someone really really lost and speaking English, and I was like, okay, do you need some help? But it is surprising. Also, people who visited Kiev, I don't know, in the 90s and in early 2000s, and I'm just like,
Hmm.
whoa, that must have been very wild. Or they visited also other places then, and I get genuinely happy when people went to Ukraine, they saw it and they saw that it's a real place. It's not
Hmm.
like as this appendix as
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
spoke about. But that is very refreshing. Do we want to move on to the second
Sure, hit me.
point? I don't know which one of them would you like to talk about?
Let's have a little chat about relativism, right? And this notion of truth as a matter of perspective. So, on one hand, right, you understand there is propaganda, right, and there are people who get swayed by it, right? But we also kind of don't exist in the world anymore where you can just say no, this is like objectively true. I mean, you can say that, right, but it's not going to have much effect. And this does get utilized, right? But you also see that here and now, right? It stops being a matter of, well, I don't really know about that, right? But then people will listen to you as a Ukrainian, right? And be like, yeah, yeah, okay, cool, cool, good. Yeah, I believe you, right? And then they'll go and talk to a Russian person and they'll be also like, yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, that's also good. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, you can have your truth, and it's an interesting world to navigate, right? It's also the argument that is used by Holocaust denials, right? That oh yeah, sort of. You can have your own truth, right, based on whatever facts you choose. Right now, I'll have my own, and you can also see that now with Trump, right, and just modern day
Yeah.
politics. And to be honest, it's not entirely clear to me how to navigate this world, right? Because yeah, sure, there's a problem with arguing, but at least you can get somewhere, right? And when people just they shut themselves closer and they're like, no, you can say whatever, right? I will stick by my worldview and nothing can sway me. That becomes honestly frustrating.
Yeah. And why do you think the world is well? Like we spoke
Mhm.
about the bots. So the fact that there is the giving end
Mhm.
in there, right? Why do you think folks are more susceptible and more willing to accept these kind of new truths?
I mean, I think it's a question sort of aimed more than the sociologist, right? And maybe
Yeah, just as you
philosophers to an
see it. I'm
extent.
not. I'm not expecting a degree of in
Um,
sociology from you.
yeah, no, but it's more that to an extent less bothered by why, right, and more by how. Like, how do I then exist in this world, right?
Yeah.
What do I do with this kind of worldview?
Yeah.
Um,
Because it threatens our existence, right?
and I mean, in a situation where you need to get as much support as you can in order to survive, it kind of becomes critical.
I see what you mean. It is for us. It is an existential question. Like, how do we continue living in the world like this? Like, is it gonna get increasingly worse?
Hmm.
Is a fate is the fate of an entire country, which is Ukraine, going to be determined by people wanting to believe the half truths?
Yeah, I
You know,
mean, like that's what happens in practice, right? Because in reality, you get to deal with not the general public, but the representatives, which are then elected, right? And they're elected based on whatever people believe, right? And now there's always an election cycle in the U.S., right? But um,
the never ending. Yep.
now you're facing the question of okay, how is it going to turn out, like with Trump versus Biden?
It's
And
not looking
it
good.
is scary, right? And also the
Yeah.
recent EU elections with AfD like just gathering insane amount of support, right? And Le Pen, and you're like, sorry, what? Like,
Yeah.
how does this happen?
The world is swinging. Like it's just such a classical game, you know, like let's like every 90 years or so, let's swing massively to the right and then have another world war. Does that sound like a good plan? So you guys like, no, let's like for once
That's
not do
not.
this. Like let's for once not do this. Let's protect our democratic institutions.
And it's interesting also how it happens across the political spectrum, right? Because you see Le Pen, right, being on the far right or alt right, I don't know, and at the same time, you get to deal with folks who are like left leaning, right, who present themselves as progressive, and then they also exist like within their worldview, and there the ground truth is that U.S. bad,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
and if you are aligned like in any way with the U.S., then you're in the wrong, right? And like if Russia is somehow involved, then Russia is obviously in the right. And sort of this
This
is
is the
my
Cold
bubble,
War
right?
mentality, by the way. Like the
Yeah.
enemy of my enemy is my friend is the Cold War thing. So that's why the Russians were allying with everyone in the Middle East,
Yeah.
um, except for in Afghanistan,
Mhm.
and then the U.S. was allying with the I hope I'm pronouncing this right Mujahideen in Afghanistan.
Mhm.
Such a fun story, uh, and I think it's just yeah, like everything they don't want to stand for the what are they? The progressives they identify themselves as. In terms of these things, yes, it is a Cold War mentality, which I'm really sad that it turns out this way, right? Because then we're just thinking in these black and white categories, which is
Mhm.
oh goodness, yeah,
A good friend of mine, like
it's
on
exhausting.
the way here, I was talking to a good friend, and he, I think he visualized it in a really nice manner, where, like he says, you take a world map, right, and you start coloring it with two colors, right?
Black and
And
white.
yeah, and then
Yeah.
and you start with the white in your own country, right?
Yeah.
And you color black sort of people you're opposed to, right?
Yeah.
And then you start like drawing this transitive, okay, who's an ally of that and who's an ally of this,
Yeah.
yeah, and you end up with this like very sharp division that has practically nothing to do with the values you started from. Like, sort of, it just one thing that makes me explode every time when people say that Russia is anti-colonial.
Oh goodness.
Like, ah,
In our pilot version of the podcast, we were talking about this, like the
Mhm.
how do you get this big?
Yeah,
How do you
yeah.
get this big unless you're waging wars of imperial conquest? I don't know. Maybe all these nations and Asia just wanted to be part of Russia. No, they did not. They did
One
not.
happy family, right? That's how it
One
works.
big happy family. No oppression. No racism. Also, for the context, I think the largest proportion of soldiers sent
Mhm.
to war fight in Ukraine from Russia are ethnic, minorities. I
Mhm.
would call them minorities because there are a lot of folks that are just um,
Just non-Slavic.
non-Slavic looking folks, those of different faiths than Orthodox
Mhm.
Christian, and they're the first ones in the line to be sent to this war of
I mean,
context.
also again,
Complexities.
recent piece of news with North Korea announcing that they'll be sending troops.
Oh,
Uh, cheers.
well, will South Korea be sending troops to us? Because I've heard it's like this polarized world, and so if North Korea is doing
Yeah,
that,
I mean,
then South
somehow
Korea.
the polarized world is only true when it's against you in favor, right?
Oh
Like,
yeah, yeah. It only works one way. Yeah, but you clearly see this that the dictatorships out there are thinking in these.
Mhm.
So they're a lot more efficient, at least from where I stand, and in terms of giving each other weapons. They're a lot better at just kind of finding the highest common denominator, which is
Mhm.
basically U.S. bad, right?
Yeah.
Let's destroy the U.S. So Iran,
Mhm.
North Korea, are delivering weapons to Russia. It's not a secret, by the way. So whoever is not in this context, Shahed drones from Iran have been used to destroy Ukrainians'
I
houses
mean, I think
predominantly
that's
since like 2022.
yeah, it's since almost the very beginning of the big
Yeah,
invasion.
yeah. It's just not everyone is in the context, so
Yeah,
that
yeah.
people don't think that there's some kind of crazy conspiracy theory. No, unfortunately, the Shahed drone is a thing.
Mhm.
Do we hate Iranian people? No, we don't. They're wonderful.
I like how you're careful here. Oh.
No, but I really wanted to say that because I really admire, the fight,
Mhm.
the genuine fight they've been putting up, and I
Yeah,
know
I
quite
mean,
a
it's
few folks
also
from
kind of a good
Iran.
example of, I think, Iran, it provides a clear division, right, between the state and the people,
Yeah,
right? While if you look at Russia, unless you start like digging into nitty-gritty details, right, the view on Ukraine isn't really all that nuanced, right? It is still sort of it's a colony, right? And yeah, maybe we'll allow it like different degrees of freedom, but it still exists in this. Yeah, I mean, it's just an extra bit that we might or might not legally call part of our country, but it's our sphere of influence. Don't you dare step there.
yeah.
Um,
This makes me think of Pomerantsev's work. I'm
mhm,
not sure to which extent that was also mentioned in the "This Is Not Propaganda" book. So this is an interesting thing, right? So like one of the I think interesting aspects of this Russian prism is
mhm,
that folks in the West still genuinely believe that there is some kind of democratic movement is
mhm.
still like genuinely possible
Yeah, yeah.
in
I mean,
Russia.
and in a way, right? This
This,
belief kind
this is
of
just
gives Russia legitimacy,
heartbreaking.
right? Like
Yeah, it does.
this is another factor that makes them sit you and a Russian, right, at the same
Yeah,
table,
at the same table.
and be like, let's have a discussion here.
Yeah,
And I mean, I think that's partially why I was interested in Lipset's work, right? Because this is not a discussion in a sense that you can agree on something or you can establish some baselines, right? But it is a way to legitimize just bigotry, right, and racism and colonialism. And then if you engage in that, you like the only thing you do, right, is you give some more room to deniers of the war, right, or people who generally believe that Russia has done nothing wrong, right, and then existence for all the good things.
I think that's an important point in this case, right? The genuine belief, and I would have loved to believe that there's
Mhm,
some a democratic movement in Russia is possible, provided this democratic movement is also going to decolonize it and strip it of
mhm,
its vastly imperialistic identity. But I don't believe at this point anymore, and I have my reasons to do so. A lot of Ukrainians also do not believe this, because we saw what Russia is. Interestingly, I think to a certain extent, this might have been. Maybe it's vain to believe this, but I think maybe this was also influenced by the fact that Ukraine was able to do this, right? So at some point we were moving in the exact same direction as Russia
mhm.
was, as it's not a secret that we used to have also this completely, a government that was basically
Very
swinging in
pro-Russian, yeah.
full on dictatorship, right? We had dictatorship like laws and the police state and everything, and then
Didn't last for long,
nah,
fortunately.
yeah, it was a brief moment in our history, and the democracy we have right now is also very precarious, and it's definitely not
Mhm,
perfect, which democracy never is, by the way. Just a small note on that. But I sometimes do dare to believe that maybe the collective West is keeps on believing in
mhm,
this because they saw that Ukraine was able to do this, and they're thinking, well, but maybe again, this is like the Russian prism, right? Like if Ukraine was able to do this, and Ukraine is so
yeah,
similar
must
to
be able to.
Russia. There was one more thing that I just wanted to add on this. Pomerantsev likes to talk about this guy whose name is Demler. So it was basically a guy who was a German native
Mhm,
speaker who grew up in London, as far as I remember. And during the Second World War, he was broadcasting basically news and opinions, and he made it sound like the German radio.
mhm,
Everything was suggesting it was German radio because it was broadcasted in perfect German. But the thing is, it was broadcasted to the Germans, to the
mhm,
German soldiers, to German families, and you could tell that was the British cosplaying
mhm.
Germans, saying complete nonsense from time to time. But in a lot of cases, also touching upon like very important and painful societal topics, such as you know um, the families of soldiers' day-to-day lives, which were miserable. So Daimler's contribution into this was that he was the person that was, as far as I know, behind this project,
Mhm.
right? And this was actually a very genius project because it sounded like it quacked like a dog and all of that.
Mhm.
But and so if German, like if Gestapo would storm your house and say like, the heck you're listening to, you would not be hanged for listening to BBC, for example, or something, some kind of other dissident radio
Mhm.
station, right? You would be listening to some kind of alternative
Yeah.
to the German propaganda
Mhm.
without it sounding so revealing and so obvious, although it
Yeah.
did state a lot of things that were, you know, crazy. Uh, it was just like a very subtle and very genius project in like penetrating the German um, vacuum
Mhm.
and like this complete power of the German propaganda, and so families would actually be able to get information on their loved ones, soldiers missing in action, things like that. And so everyone would be glued to this radio station because
Mhm.
they knew that they would be getting this very important information earlier than, for example, the German authorities would be broadcasting this information. And so that's how it became immensely popular, and it got actual tangible results during the war.
Mhm.
And I'm going to come to the point, but I'm just like
Yeah.
I'm so impressed by this example and the fact that it wasn't like a completely different narrative, but it wasn't done by anyone who like spoke German as a second language. It
Mhm.
was literally a German guy impersonating like God knows whom. And so it was completely safe to listen to this because nobody would ever actually suspect it was not
Mhm.
Germans doing this, except for the German authorities. And so this project was really genius in itself. But the reason this project came about is
Mhm.
because at some point the Allies realized that there was no chance for any type of genuine democratic uprising in Germany anymore.
Mhm.
So there was obviously the German resistance. So like the first post-war um, chancellor of Germany,
Mhm.
Willy Brandt, was one of the members of the
Mhm.
resistance. But there was no political movement, right?
Mhm.
Like it was completely dead. It was killed throughout the 1930s, I think, and
Mhm.
by the time the Second World War broke out, there was no hope. And I think this
Yeah.
is maybe the example we need to follow, rather than hope that Russia is
Yeah.
capable of democratic.
Mhm.
I mean, hopefully it will be in the long term, but
I mean, in the same way, right, that you and I are stripped of subjectivity, right? Um, you also need to take the subjectivity away from Russia, right? You need to take the platform away. You need to be able to understand that you cannot be like at the common table, right? If you cannot follow some just civil discussion rules, right? If you cannot abstain from making just bullshit up as you go. I was thinking during the story you were telling while you were telling the story, right, about also how Ukrainian society got to deal with what you call it multipolar worldview, right? And I remember discussions in Ukrainian intellectual circles how to sort of what do you do when you're invited to a festival, right? And then you're there and a Russian is there. And what do you do? Like, do you refuse to go there because then it provides them with a platform, right? Or do you go and you try to convey your points regardless of who's sitting across the table? And
yeah.
like, there is no definite answer to this, right? Like, it's all sort of you try to weigh pro and cons, right? And then you try to see what kind of benefit can you get from it. It's also just a sucky position to be in.
Yeah. I think like if there's only one thing that this podcast can achieve, let that be one person out there. Just one person is enough who is in any way involved in culture, education, sports. I don't know, all these fun things that people
Mhm.
usually do for fun, and we are doing for promoting our country out of freaking despair that we are trapped in. If there's one person that changes their opinion and says we're not going to be putting
Mhm.
Ukrainians and Russians into the same space and asking them for some kind of forgiveness, understanding, you name it. Like if that happens after this podcast, I'm gonna be the happiest person in the world. Like for a day. Like I promise. I have a very high bar for like what we have to do. But I think this is very important to realize. I do want to hope that the war is going to end in Ukrainian victory, and we are going to. There are so many steps we have to take before that. We need to get our justice. We need to bury our dead. We need to mourn for our dead. You have no idea how much mourning is being postponed right now, just so people will collapse. They need to continue with their day to day life. They need to raise their children. They need to go to work. They need to donate their money so then we actually can win this war. There's so much mourning that is not being done right now. By the time we will have mourned all of our dead, like those Russian artists you are inviting to so-called like establish peace, truth, and understanding, they're gonna be like old, because that's how long it takes to heal. So please don't force these things on us. Thank you. How are you feeling, Bodan?
Yeah, we covered some ground, right? We went from just general Russian propaganda, right, to the notion that you might not find common language, right, to this polar view, right, represented then by Russia as a state, right, and then you cannot just say that yeah, sort of I just take the opposite sort of what the US does, right, and I'll be good.
Yeah. Yeah, and for that matter, if we could choose a different ally than the US, would we?
Well, I mean, so if you're talking about trying to pick a country that committed fewer war crimes, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, don't get me wrong, but fuck you, Bill Clinton. So, if anyone wants to ever go check out the Budapest Memorandum
Mhm.
wiki article, you might get some context as to why I've just said that. Oh my god, that hurts so bad. Still,
Mhm.
so if we could pick different allies, we would. But Lithuanians are not manufacturing as many weapons, so they're happy to support us. So do Latvians, Estonians. We have a few amazing allies that are also like equally as have been standing on the right side of history. Like I don't want to be responsible for whatever the US has done. Like I might sound like very American when I speak but this is a historical responsibility I'm talking about right now. So definitely Google Budapest Memorandum. We're not going to cover it today. Maybe we'll cover it shall we cover it in our next podcast?
We can, yeah. Have to hash out a plan for that.
Is there anything you wanted to add?
Not off the top of my head. Sort of, I'm trying to kind of trace the story through the things we talked about, and right, to be honest, I guess this conversation left me in a place which is similar to sort of how you feel when you get to sort of to read the news, right? And then there's sort of like another crime that is committed by Russia, right? And then you try to go through the day, right? And you try to perhaps have a conversation about it, and by the end of it, you're just tired. You're lost. I mean, at least I am, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't know. What can I do to make this better? Right? I don't know what can I do to fix it. And sometimes, right, you just go to bed and you think, well, I mean, maybe today was the day when you couldn't do much.
The extent of the crimes committed by Russia in Ukraine, it's incomprehensible. And I'm afraid
Mhm.
that none of us individually have any impact much, right? Like individually. Of
Mhm.
course, together we can do things like,
Drop in an ocean.
sorry, a drop in the ocean.
I mean, drop in the ocean. Yeah.
We're a drop in the ocean, yeah. But it's true. And I think, whoever is, as I said, whoever is willing to listen to why we are so frustrated about us not having the same subjectivity as Russia. Like hopefully this was giving a little bit of a context, and if not, then too bad. Thank you for listening,
Thank you so
or
much.
not listening, or listening at 1.5 speed, which is what I usually
Whichever
do with
speed
podcasts.
you're at, you go.
Please like, comment,
Subscribe,
subscribe,
follow us.
do all these things in that exact order, in no particular order. Thank you so much for your attention. And if you've made it all the way to this part, then, you know, you're
Hopefully,
awesome.
yeah, you'll hear us in the next one.
Like, comment,
Subscribe.
subscribe.
Okay.